You're listening to Margins and Meaning with John Wilson. Margins and Meaning accepts zero responsibility for remakes, delaminations, fractures, open contact, poor scans, missing opposing, unindexed bites, or any case that miraculously hits your inbox without a requested shade. Anything I say on this show is just my opinion. It's not gospel. It's not CE. It's not legal advice, and it definitely may induce emotional damage. Please, if you choose to listen to anything that was discussed here today, you do so at your own risk, preferably with a full night's sleep, sharp burrs, and a clinician who actually realized there is, in fact, more shades in the shade guide than just A2. Listen at your own risk. Thank you. Welcome back to Margins and Meaning. My name is John Wilson. This is the start of episode 3, and I wanted to take a quick moment and thank you for all of the wonderful well wishes that I've got for this little podcast. I wasn't expecting this. It was more or less a way for me to chronicle my early years with hopes that it would resonate with somebody else that have going through the struggles, or somebody that's already been through those struggles, and my words would just really trigger a memory. So today I'm going to try to trigger some more memories. I'm going to go back to where we left off. I'm going to share some very specific feelings that I had. I've always been that auditory person where, a song could play and it would bring me back to a specific place. It would bring me back to a specific feeling that I've had in the past. Today, I'm going to share a very special sound, and it may be silly to you, but I can remember the very vivid sound as I've walked down the stairs of that condo to the garage, as I've clicked that garage door opener button, and I can hear the squeak and the squeal of the springs as that door starts to open. In my mind's eye, it brings me right back to that really very difficult time in my life. Walking into that lab that I fondly named the furnace, it was a very difficult time in my life. The heat of the summer days that I would spend those long hours in was excruciating. No air conditioning, a simple fan, it just was not enough. But the doorway to the furnace, that tough chapter in my life, it wasn't beautiful, but what it did do is it shaped me because it burned away everything that I wasn't ready to face. So tonight, I'm going to take you back into that garage, into the heat, into that fear that I had, into the long hours I shared, and even the longer doubts that I had daily. That furnace that almost broke me, but ultimately, as I see it, forged me into the technician that I needed to become. Guys, that garage door opened the same way every single day. Slow and reluctant, letting out that squeal of the spring. Somehow that sound brings me back like it was yesterday. It's almost like that damn garage door was mocking me for coming back so soon, because the truth was I lived in that little 400 square feet. I'd walk down those stairs half alive, push that button on the remote, walking into this world that somehow I created but never envisioned would be as it was. That smell would hit you first, that musty, humid blend of acrylic and steam left over from the processing the night before. It certainly wasn't a scent that I would choose, but you know what? It chose me. And every single day it was the same. I'd close the door to that garage just so that the HOA would not hear me or see what I was doing at those wee hours of the day. I'd start my ritual of what I called the breaker dance. I would unplug the processing. I would plug in the compressor. I'd try the lathe and make sure that things were not too loud, that it wouldn't draw attention, but more importantly, that that damn breaker wouldn't just pop. I'd sit down in that chair that I just left what seemed like minutes ago. The squeak of the springs of that chair would tell me and make me reflect on the day ahead. That heat would start almost immediately in those days. There was no AC in there, no, just a simple box fan pushing warm air around like it was doing me some sort of favor. But then, as the morning sun would rise, a little strip of light would come underneath that garage door, and I'd crack it just a little bit. And all of a sudden, just a whiff of that cool morning air would come into that garage, and it felt like hope. I could start breathing again. And somehow it pushed me forward in the day, and I would make it through that time. But all the while, the sounds of that little garage or lab, we'd have the Bunsen burner going, the flame would dance a little bit. You'd hear this little high-pitched whir matched with the sound of the lathe and that box fan. It almost made like a little harmony that I can still hear today. Guys, those sounds are the sounds of my early years, and I share that with you today to try to spur an emotion. And I can tell you that they're still etched into me today. So reflecting on those times and really going back to that moment, life was like a math problem to me. Not really simple, easy math, but it was difficult. Wasn't balanced, but what I call it was survival math. It's that feeling we all know we have bills due, the rent is coming, my gas tank is almost empty, I have nothing in the bank. I have insurance to be paid and tires that need to be replaced, but I have no money to do it. That calendar seemed to just sprint along while I was crawling to try to stay on top of it all. Those receipts were piling up, and my AR was still in the hands of other people. And every day I would walk out to that mailbox with hope. Please be a check in there. Most days it was disappointment. And while the cases were processing, I found little moments of the day to work on that jalopy of mine, changing the oil and making sure the brakes worked. Doing whatever I could to keep that car alive because it was another artery of mine. It wasn't just for transportation. It was actually what was bringing the work into the lab. So if it quit, I quit. And the thing that weighed on me the most in those times was how was I going to talk to my clients about getting paid for work I'd already done? There was a real balance of not sounding too desperate, trying to find a way not to upset that clinician. And it really was an overwhelming feeling of shame, trying to enforce my own value. But when that check finally came in, guys, and it almost never was for the full amount that they owed, I realized later in life, after absorbing that and understanding that that's how it was just a little reminder of the imbalance that I was absorbing. You see, you do the work, but somehow they're deciding what you're worth. When I think of those summers that I spent in that little garage, God, those summers were just brutal. That garage would hit over 100 degrees even before the sun would come up. In those months of the year, the production would slow down because doctors and their associates took time off or found ways to go on vacation. The income would slow, and it was stressful. And in those months, I got to watch my friends and people I didn't know find ways to go on vacation. That crazy word that I had never really experienced in my life, but I still sat there in that garage finding ways to make do. And the real state of where I was at in that time came over me. I didn't own a real business. I owned what I call a dysfunctional job where I had to give everything. It demanded everything from me. And somehow it gave me nothing stable in return. And in those moments when you're young and you're dreaming about your future, maybe marriage, a family, a house of your own, those dreams didn't just feel distant, they felt impossible at times. That work would slow down, the stress would rise. While you had stress every other day, you had a little more time to think about it now. Loneliness would set in as you sat there looking at the work, but guys, I stayed. I put my head down. I gritted my teeth and somehow I made it through. Because in those years, I felt that maybe quitting was going to feel worse than the suffering that I was putting in. So then there came a moment that really shook me awake and was an amazing teaching moment. You see, I'd been grinding away and plugging along and pushing hard for this clinic that wanted something fast and never really provided excellence to me. It wasn't work I was super proud of in those days, but I convinced myself that it was necessary to survive. One day, as I walked into that clinic, I noticed new lab slips from another lab. Anger hit me immediately, and then fear bit me so hard. That kind of fear that bites you so hard before you even realize it's there, and then it hits you. You're out of control. You're not controlling your future. I confronted that decision maker. I looked him firm in the eye, tried to stay tough, but inside I was weak, scared. I asked, "What's going on?" And he didn't sugarcoat it. He looked right at me after, a lot of years with this guy. He looked me straight in the eye and says, "John, we're always looking for the next best thing." God, I felt like I was being cheated on. I asked him very confidently, "Wasn't my work good enough?" He said, "Yeah, you're on time and you read the lab slips, but John, that's just not enough." And that really hit hard. Not because it was really wrong, but because those were the exact same things that he hated about his prior lab. So I gave him what he wanted. So I swallowed my pride. I looked at him and said, hey, give me 6 months. I'll start taking more continuing education. Tell me exactly what you want and I'll get better. Somehow, some way, he agreed to that. I don't know if he felt bad for me, but I can tell you those next 6 months were hell. But something started to shift, and I'm going to share exactly what that was. As I look back on that moment where I promised that I would get better in 6 months, I wasn't sure if it was possible, but I can tell you this much. Continuing education became my vacations. Most people think about going somewhere, like going to the beach or doing something with their families. For me, this was the only vacations that I took. It wasn't anything other than classrooms and fluorescent lights, the projectors, and techs who spoke a language I so wanted to learn. I absolutely loved it. I loved watching people that were passionate and had direction and somehow were making a living doing things that they loved. That was just something that connected with me. It was something I wanted. And as I was exhausted in the evenings, I still found time to flip through those trade magazines looking for a course that, of course, I couldn't afford, but somehow I would find a way to open that Velcro wallet of mine and spend money that should have gone towards something else, because in some way I knew that this was my future. This was my way out of the path that I was not satisfied with. And slowly, between the pickups, between struggling to find time for meals, grabbing a crappy fast food in between offices and the all-nighters, those suffocating due dates, something started to change. I started to improve. It almost felt like that new carver started to carve that wax easier. The movements clicked on the articulator in such a better manner. Things that used to fight me started to cooperate. Sometimes I'd cross path with a patient in the operatory and hear how happy they were, listen to how the staff actually recollected the appointment. And that tiny bit of validation, it certainly was enough to power me through another midnight shift. So I'm going to share the pivot point for me. After those 6 months of CE, I started noticing that I was capturing the attention of better quality clients. These fee-for-services offices that were actually giving me real records. These clinics were actually looking for something more, something better. Not just something to deliver, but something that they could be proud of. Suddenly, I started not just interpreting the mush bites that I had been receiving from these other offices. I was getting real box-planed rims with tracings and really demanding functional movements. And good records, man, I tell you, they will expose you. They demand your best. I forced myself to learn what real balanced occlusion was, real contouring, real anatomy, not the shortcuts that I had been using all those other years. But I'll tell you, working in the heat of that garage was like having the damn devil push those teeth out of those perfect positions. It was hard. It was difficult, but somehow I was improving. I started to begin to form my own signature. Those little nuances that you put into your work that only you can see. I found a way to wax a very specific way. I fought myself through them, learning how to make the movements work. I executed excellence. And when I had that follow-up meeting and I walked into that office and looked that decision maker in the eye, I was a different person. I put in the time. I suddenly had gotten better. I told them very succinctly I was raising my prices. I handed them a new RX form. I told them that, there's 2 boxes on here, economy and premium. He looked at me kind of strangely. I said, listen, you asked for something more. I'm going to give you something more, but it's going to cost you. I said, it's your decision on what you want. You have to choose on the slab slip. You're not going to get the premium service that you've been demanding without paying more for it. I was strong in my conviction, and he kind of gave me a little wry smile. And I worked for that office for a few more years, but I can promise you this. Every checkbox on that thing was the original economy version. You see, they weren't my partner. They were trying to control me. And that lesson right there made me realize that real partnerships come from a symbiotic relationship. It has to be good for both of us. So even after taking that CE to try to appease this client, I absolutely recognized that this was not the type of partner that I wanted. While I had amassed some value in it, I learned a considerable amount of real-world wisdom. But learning that they weren't my partner was the best thing that could have happened to me. But now the realization of that the next new chapter in my life is starting. I had to really recognize that I was limited in what I can do by myself. I had to learn to now consider the option of bringing in staff. All the new struggles about being a boss, learning to lead, and dealing with staff, none of which I was really ready for. But I can tell you this much, that furnace, that lovely reference to that laboratory had burned away any other fear of trying that. And now the next step. So those years in the garage, they just didn't burn me. I like to believe they refined me. They stripped away every illusion I had about this trade, every excuse that I was making, every shortcut that I implemented. Those years, they revealed that technician underneath the fear, underneath the doubt, underneath the struggle that I was facing. And it taught me something that I still believe today, something that I always share. You're never finished. You never have all the answers. There's always the next better version of you. Because you're not finished, guys. But you're always becoming something better. And if I'm to be really honest about that, if I knew what I know now back then, just how much that furnace would ask of me, I think I probably would still walk in that door anyways. Because sometimes, guys, the fire is the only place hot enough to really melt you down, put you in your place, refine you into what you were really meant to be. And now looking back with a bit more wisdom, I get to realize something I really didn't understand in the time. Those hard years in the furnace, it wasn't intentionally trying to punish me. It was preparing me. I like to think that it was teaching me how to work, how to think, how to stand up for myself, how to stop confusing that daily pressure and fear as failure. You see, those years didn't make me the best technician. I could have all the intention in the world. All I was looking for is a way to find the passion, how to find fulfillment, how to find happiness in the daily basis of what we were doing, and how to find the real understanding of it all, that you never have it all figured out. It's a journey, guys. And one day it made me actually think that maybe I could become that technician who is better. And I constantly strive for that even today. And if nothing else, guys, if I look back on that time, it taught me that sometimes the only way through these most difficult situations in life is straight through the hottest part of the fire. And the funny thing when we reflect on those times, that furnace, it never asked me if I was ready for any of this. But somehow, it made damn sure I would be. Thank you.